Welcome back to the Daily Signal and welcome to the second Battlefront briefing of the year. Let me start with a number, 900 gigabytes. That's the amount of data a ransomware group calling itself Everest claims to have stolen from Nissan Motor Company. Now, pause for a second because this is not just another breach headline. When a global automotive giant is allegedly hit at its scale, we are not talking about a few leaked emails or some exposed PDFs. We are talking about the digital blueprint of a multinational industrial ecosystem. And here's the key point I want you to sit with. If this claim is accurate, this is not just Nissan's problem. It's a signal, it's a warning flare about where cybercrime is heading in 2026. Because what we are seeing here is not noise, it's a pattern, it's an escalation. And today we are going to break down why this alleged breach matters, who's behind it, and what it means, not just for corporations, but for supply chains, partners, and everyday people who never consented to be part of this battlefield. To understand why this matters, we need to talk about who is claiming responsibility. The group calling itself Everest Ransomware Group is not new, but they are also not your typical smash and grab ransomware outfit. Everest has been operating for several years now, quietly building a reputation around high value, high pressure intrusions. What makes them interesting and dangerous is that they don't behave like opportunists. They behave like strategists. Everest doesn't just encrypt systems and demand payment. They specialize in data exfiltration first and leverage second. In other words, we don't just lock you out, we take your crown jewels with us. And here's where the story gets a little bit uncomfortable. Groups like Everest are no longer just criminals reacting to vulnerabilities. They are actors embedded in a mature cybercrime economy, where access brokers, ransomware crews, and data traffickers operate like supply chains of their own. So when Everest claims an intrusion of this scale, the real question is not just did it happen? The real question is why Nissan, why now, and what does this choice tell us about the next phase of a cyber conflict? That's what we'll start unpacking next, by looking at what kind of data is allegedly at stake and why its exposure creates a ripple effect far beyond a single company. Let's talk then about impact, not in abstract terms, but in real-world consequences. According to Everest's claim, close to 900 gigabytes of data were exfiltrated from Nissan Motor Company. Now, Nissan has not publicly confirmed the scope of this data, and that distinction matters. But from an intelligence perspective, the claim itself already tells us something important. Data theft at this scale is rarely random. When attackers extract hundreds of gigabytes, they are not just grabbing whatever they can carry. They are selecting, filtering, and prioritizing. Typically, that means three categories: personal data, employees, partners, customers, internal documentations, processes, credentials, architecture, and intellectual properties, design, operational knowledge, strategic plan, and here's where the risk multiplies. This kind of data doesn't just get leaked once, it gets reused, repackaged, weaponized over time. Identity theft and phishing are the obvious outcomes, but they are only the first wave. What follows are second-order attacks, targeted phishing against dealership, counterfeit components entering supply chain, and espionage campaigns that don't make headlines until years later. This is the part most breach coverage skips. The damage does not peak on disclosure day. It compounds quietly long after the news cycle moves on. Now, let's zoom out a bit because this is where the story becomes more alarming. Nissan is not an isolated case. The group known as Everest ransomware group has been linked to, or has claimed, multiple large-scale data theft operations across very specific sectors. We have seen Everest associated with SIAD, a major industrial gas supplier, followed by public blackmail countdowns, Under Armour, where hundreds of gigabytes of corporate data were reportedly stolen, and Collins Aerospace, with claims tied to operational disruption in aviation environments. Look at those names carefully: apparel, industrial gases, aerospace, automotive. These are not random victims. What we are observing is a clear shift in targeting strategy, away from opportunistic mass ransomware and toward strategic industrial and infrastructure targets. This is pattern recognition in action. Everest is not just chasing ransom payments, they are accumulating leverage over supply chains, over operational continuity, and over trust ecosystems that span continents. And once you see that pattern, Nissan stops looking like a headline and starts looking like the next domino in a much larger campaign. The question has then become, if this is the pattern, what's driving it? And more importantly, who ultimately benefits from destabilizing entire industrial ecosystem? Well, at this point, it's tempting to explain everything with one word: money. And yes, ransom payments matter, of course. But if financial gain were the only driver, we wouldn't be seeing this precision targeting of industrial giants. What we are really looking at is a three-way balance of power. First, economic disruption. When a global manufacturer or supplier is hit, the impact ripples across logistics, production, and regional economies. Even a credible threat of data exposure can delay deals, halt operations, and force strategic decisions. Second, intellectual property. Data stolen today doesn't always surface tomorrow. It can sit dormant, quietly transferred, analyzed, or sold, creating a long-term competitive advantages that never appear in breach notifications. And third, the least discussed factor: geopolitics. Modern cybercrime doesn't operate in isolation from global power dynamics. These groups exist in environments where regulation is fragmented, enforcement is selective, and cyber norms are weak or deliberately ignored. That creates space for gray zone. Criminal actors who are not officially state-sponsored but whose actions align neatly with broader geopolitical interests. The result? Well, cybercrime ecosystems that mirror internal rivalry, influencing industrial competition without a single missile fired or sanction announced. This is why ransomware today feels different. It's not just extortion, it's pressure, leverage, and sometimes strategic ambiguity by design. And when you see it through that lens, the next question becomes almost unavoidable. If entire industries are fair game, who really pays the price? And here's where the story gets personal. Because breaches like this don't end at the perimeter of a corporation like Nissan Motor. They propagate. Think of this less like a single explosion and more like a line of falling dominoes. When a manufacturer is compromised, the first domino is not the ransom payment. It's a supply chain. Suppliers share systems, credentials, documentation, logistics data. Dealerships rely on centralized platforms, service portals, customer records. Partners integrate APIs, billing systems, identity flows, and every one of those connections becomes an attack surface. So what does that look like in practice? Dealership systems targeted with hyper-realistic phishing, suppliers compromised through trusted access paths, customers receiving scams that reference real vehicles, real service records, real names. This is the uncomfortable truth most cybersecurity coverage avoids. The majority of victims never appear in breach headlines. They are downstream, they are indirect, they are everyday users who did nothing wrong except exist inside a connected system. And attackers know this. That's why stolen data is so valuable. Not just for what it reveals, but for how convincingly it lets criminals impersonate trust. So when you hear about a breach like this, the right question is not will Nissan recover? It's how many invisible dominoes are really falling? And that brings us to the final part of today's briefing. Where is this heading next and what can actually be done about it? So where does this leave us? If cases like the alleged Nissan breach tell us anything, it's this. The cyber battlefield is narrowing, but the strikes are getting sharper. We are moving away from noisy, indiscriminate ransomware campaigns and toward highly targeted industrial theft, meaning operations designed to extract maximum leverage from minimal exposure. Expect to see fewer mass infections and more precision intrusions that quietly compromise the most valuable nodes in global supply chains. Artificial intelligence will certainly accelerate this shift, but not in a sci-fi way. In very practical terms, automated reconnaissance, faster privilege mapping, and data triage at machine speed. At the same time, supply chains will become the default entry point. It's definitely easier to compromise trust than to break hardened perimeters. And attackers know that one weak partner can unlock an entire ecosystem. There's another pressure point forming as well, and it's often overlooked, which is cyber insurance. As breaches grow larger and more systemic, insurers are rethinking coverage, exclusions, and premiums. That means organizations may soon discover that risk transfer is no longer guaranteed. So what actually works going forward? Well, not security theater, not checklist. What matters is visibility and behavior. Zero trust must extend beyond slogans into how identities, partners, and supplies are continuously verified. Organizations need to understand who is connected, how they behave, and what changes over time, not just what tools are installed. The takeaway is very simple, even if the problem is not, of course. The winners in the next phase of cyber conflict will not be the ones who block the most attacks, but the ones who detect the most change. And with that, let's close this briefing and let's bring this back to a single signal. The alleged breach of Nissan Motor Company claimed by the Everest ransomware group is not just another ransomware story. Then it becomes a marker of how cyber conflict has evolved, from opportunistic disruption to strategic pressure against entire industrial ecosystems. We have seen how data theft now creates long-term leverage, not just short-term ransom. Supply chains and partners are the real attack surface, and everyday users often carry the hidden cost of corporate breaches. So the uncomfortable truth is this: you don't need to be the target to be affected. That's why we do these briefings. Battlefront Briefing is not about headline, it's about understanding the terrain before the next move is made. If this analysis helped you see the big picture, the bigger picture actually, support the channel by liking this video, subscribing, and sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more breakdowns like this, past, present, and future cyber battlefield, check out the Battlefield Briefing playlist right here on the Daily Signal. So thanks for watching, stay sharp, stay curious. I'm Max, Point Break Security, and I'll see you in the next signal.